So recently, we saw the release of the latest installment in the MCU with the release of The Marvels, which, well, I mean, it's pretty much Captain Marvel too, isn't it? But now we've got some extra characters filling out the cast. And yeah, I wasn't looking forward to this movie whatsoever, I'll be honest with you. I was very, very finished with the MCU, and I have been for quite a while. I didn't like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and I think the trend of the superhero film, it's well and truly dying. As in, the superhero era, it seems to be winding down quite heavily. Yeah, they'll still be popular, yeah, they'll still make money, but it's not what it was at the end of the 2010s. They'll still be successful, I don't see them ever truly going away, but it's clear to me that Marvel had very much overstretched themselves and had oversaturated the market, so to speak. Gone were the days where you only had to head to the cinema every couple of months to keep up with the various storylines, but now you got a bunch of different films, so many different films, and a huge roster of characters. Plus there's the Disney Plus shows, and really it just makes it very hard to keep up with it all after a while, especially since the plot unfolds in a way that makes you need to keep seeing everything, which was very frustrating. And so, my desire to keep watching really suffered as a result. And yeah, I wasn't keen to go and see the film simply on that alone. But then, you gotta factor in this. At first, it had some pretty bad review scores. Like, when I went to see the film, the Rotten Tomatoes critical scores were very low, like maybe around 50%, and the audience score hadn't even been aggregated yet. So it didn't look good, all things considered. Didn't paint a very good picture of the film for me, and didn't inspire me to want to go and see it. To want to go and spend my time and money on this movie, but I did end up going, and honestly, I thought it was good. Like, is it the best Marvel film I've ever seen? No. Is it the worst I've ever seen? God, no. I think there are films in the overall franchise that I found far worse and way more boring than this film ever was. And so I'm kind of surprised that so many critics seem to be labeling it as the worst film in the MCU's history. Like, come on now. The Eternals exists, and so does Thor: The Dark World and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Those films have so much less to offer. Because at least the Marvels had something enjoyable. Those films are just boring as hell, and at times actively bad. But yeah, I do think it's a shame that it got a lot of early hate, even if the reviews are a bit more favourable now. As of writing this, a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes for critics, and an 84% for audiences. And it's also a bit sad that it seems to be doing so terribly at the box office so far. But for that, I think we do have to truly wait and see how it all unfolds, because some are labeling it a box office bomb already, but who really knows? It could end up being like Elemental, a sleeper hit. But honestly, I do kind of doubt it. But anyway, the film itself. Like I said, it's not the greatest film ever, but it was fun. It didn't take itself too seriously and was largely a character-driven piece. And I think it's in that way that the film actually really shines, because it is fun, it is lighthearted, and it captures that vibe of the early MCU to me. Maybe not in the overall storytelling, because, as we'll discuss in a minute, it does suffer at times, but more in terms of its character dynamics and the relationships you see develop on screen. They're really natural and wholesome and well done. And I think that's truly the core of the film. Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, Ms. Marvel, and the bonds that are forged between them. And of course, then there's even the minor characters too that really shine. Ms. Marvel and her parents, Nick Fury and the way he interacts with each of the different Marvels. It's just a very warm and wholesome film, but also one that's got depth. It's moving and sad, particularly the tragedy of Carol and Monica, where it's clear that Carol was more than just an aunt, but maybe a bit more like a secondary parental figure. And then she leaves and she never comes back. And then when she does come back, it's because Monica's already been snapped away by Thanos. And now they're finally reunited, but it's very bittersweet, because Monica doesn't want to open up to the deadbeat, but then when she finally does and their relationship begins to thaw out, she gets shipped off to an alternate universe. It was really well done. I mean, all three of the leads just shone here. Ms. Marvel was great, she was quirky and silly and funny. Monica was great as the slightly exasperated teen mum, with her dynamic with Ms. Marvel being one of my favourites. And Captain Marvel showed off heaps more charm and personality in this outing compared to The Avengers or Captain Marvel 1. I mean, it really just does make her characterization in the earlier films seem very lacking, two-dimensional. And so you gotta say there's been some really great writing and performances as far as your protagonists are concerned, both major and minor. And then you can combine that with some really top-tier action and choreography. Seriously, how good was the action in this film? The fights were frantic, fast-paced, exciting. I especially love the switching places gimmick and how they had to slowly adapt over time and they got more and more in sequence with one another. Probably the peak of this gimmick is where they're in 3 different locations and they keep phasing in and out fighting the 3 different battles all at once. That was really hype and really exciting. Probably one of my favourite Marvel battle sequences in ages, if I'm being honest. And they had them interspersed throughout the film, which was really nice. each one feeling a little bit different than the one before. Much enjoyed. And of course, I felt like the humour as well was on point here. It wasn't too quippy this time, which was very nice, because I think the MCU has started to rely way too heavily on that sort of thing. It was fine when Tony Stark did it, but then everyone's doing it, it's oversaturated, it's not as funny. So it was nice to step back a little bit from that, and maybe approach things a little differently. It was still there, but not as in your face this time. Mostly, it felt like they went with both cringe and absurdist humour, with the former mostly appearing in the character interactions, especially involving Kamala, and then the latter appearing in bigger sequences, like the whole musical planet, which culminates with Carol the Disney princess. And that was a highlight of the movie for me. And then of course there was the whole alien kittens eating the crew of the space station with classical music blaring in the background, and the PA system telling the frightened crew to allow themselves to get consumed as they try to scramble to escape these freaky ass tentacle cats. Honestly, this part of the film was just so ridiculous and yet so funny. But then on the other side of the coin, also one of the most disgusting and horrifying things in Marvel history. Why do the cats have to be so scary, man? Why? Every time I remember them, ugh. I look at my cat and I think, what if? And I hate it when that kind of stuff happens. Tentacles? Nah. But that being said, it's not necessarily all good either. I think the story itself, the plot, it was fairly weak. It felt like what mattered most in the script was the characters and their interactions, as well as the larger set pieces. Whether they're the big fights or the comedy bits like the musical or the octopus cat. And so it felt like the story itself did not matter, and existed solely to link together these different story beats that they wanted to hit. And because of that, you come away from it with no real sense of anything much having happened at all. And I wouldn't call that good writing. And then on top of that, I feel like this is probably the least developed and boring villain that Marvel has ever put to screen. And that's saying something, because they really have churned out some stinkers over the years. I mean, Marvel is about the heroes, it always has been. And yet historically, I feel like this often comes at the cost of compelling and exciting villains. That's not always the case, but it's a lot of the time. And that's exactly what we just saw here. She was just such a whole lot of nothing. She had potential, but never grew, never did anything. I simply couldn't care about the character and her past with Captain Marvel, because ultimately she didn't feel important. It didn't feel like it was her story being told at all. And I think this was pretty much exemplified by her dying in the lamest, most anticlimactic way possible, before promptly being forgotten, with the film going back to the true villain, which is deadbeat aunties and the trauma it inflicts upon the family dynamic. So yeah, not the greatest film of all time, but I feel like the initial dislike and hatred was overblown. It has a very weak story, but it masks it very well, with very, very good action, good effects, excellent humour, and top-tier character dynamics. And mercifully, it's also rather short. Or short as far as these films go. And so yeah, not really much else to say other than these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. If you've seen the film, what did you think? Did you like it, hate it, agree with me, disagree? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe and let me know.